Wow, huh? Mr. Wise and Dr. Field set a template for us. One that many of us already know, don't we? I want to thank Dr. Price for inviting me to be a part of this colloquium. As she has stated, I have recently joined in teaching with the Johnnie Coleman Theological Seminary, and I look forward to participating in the Panorama of Truth in July. And what I'd like to do is read the question again. Straight, white, Christian, and male, are these the requirements to power and privilege? Then what does the Bible say? So I'll go ahead and answer the second one first. No. That's it. But how do we get to the no? And how do we deal with the opposition to that no? I'm not going to go verbatim to what I've written that you have in front of you, but I will highlight some points. Let's talk about this problem. The underlying dogma, and dogma is from the Greek word that means opinion, even though it is presented as something that's almost law. It's actually just an opinion. The dogma and practices of white supremacy in the U.S. are not restricted to periodic episodes that we're seeing more and more, by the way, aren't we? Instead, they are eruptions of a much more deeply seated orientation of bigotry and hatred that can be interpreted biblically and theologically. It persists because it is connected to deep structures, and this is the key, deep structures, deep-seated notions of privilege on one hand and hand in hand with it, oppression on the other. They go hand in hand. This, in turn, is due to an underlying perverted consciousness. It is a form of consciousness. A perverted consciousness that must be exposed as the antitype of what it means to be human or in the image of divine creativity. What does it mean to be human? For this purpose, I have chosen one biblical passage. I could choose others, but just one. Genesis 1:26a through 27, which brings the notion of the image of divinity forward. It is presented and interpreted as a counter to the white supremacist narratives that have emerged since then and are still pervasive among us. The biblical presentation of the idea of Tzelem Elohim, everybody say that, Tzelem Elohim, Tzelem Elohim. Very good. You just learned your first Hebrew phrase. You did very well. The following biblical passages have been selected as ways of thinking about the models of understanding what it means to be created in the image of divinity and of transforming perverted expressions of familial, family, social, as it relates to society, political, politics, and economics, relationships. They have been rendered in a transliterated Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. I'm going to say this is important because all of my students who have studied with me know that you can't read the Bible in English because the English translation is not a Bible. It's a translation. And therefore it is inherently perverted. Every translation is in its own way false. Get that. The most imperative thing for you to do is to begin to learn how to work with the original languages. You'll hear something different. You'll see something different. So I've done this. I know we can't see it on the screen, but I want you to listen in a moment to the sounds of what I'm going to read so you can hear that it sounds different, and then by connotation, it means something different. Everybody follow me? If it sounds different, it means something different. All right. It is intended to signify, that is, these passages I'm going to read in a moment, the deep structures as well as the layers of transmission, translation, and mistranslation of these historic writings, and how those mistranslations have contributed to what is called Christian, and especially white Christian character of Western civilization, including, most especially, as we can see now, every day, the notion of the U.S. Republican Democratic experiment. Listen to these passages in their transliterated form. Hebrew transliteration of Genesis 1:26 and 27 basically sounds like this. Vayome Elohim na'aseh Adam bizalmenu kidmutenu. And one translation would be, and said, the strong ones, notice this plural, the strong ones said, let us shape human being in our image and according to our likeness. The following verse. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam bezalmo bezelem Elohim bara'oto zachar unechava bara'otam. And the Elohim, that is the strong ones, shaped the human being in its own image. And in its image, the Elohim shaped them. I want you to hear the switch between singular and plural. Shaped them, male and female. The Elohim shaped them. Everybody hear the plurality about the Elohim and the plurality about the human being, specifically as male and female? It goes on. Now, this is around 500 BCE. It's translated later into Greek. And the Greek sounds this way. Listen to the sound. Kai epen hatheas po esomen anthropon kat ekana hemeterana kai kath homa esin. And the theos, and I'm being intentional. We move from Elohim now to singular, theos. Singular being making singular human beings. This is important. It's going to change as we listen to the translations. And so now the theos said, let us, it does say, let us make the anthropon, the human being, in our, like icon is the word used, in our icon, and therefore also in our likeness. Kai epoesin ha theos ton anthropon kath ekanar, theu epoesin autos, absin kai thelu epoesin autos. And then the theos shaped the anthropon, the human being, according to its icon of the theos, male and female, the theos made them. We moved from plural, single plural, to now singular, focusing on what the singular has created. This is important. Then, around 350 BCE, Common Era, is translated into Latin. So I've done Hebrew, I've done Greek, I've done Latin. Every translation is a movement away from the original. This is another point I'm making. Every translation does what? It moves away. It doesn't move toward, it moves where? Away from the original. And so in the Latin, which most of us are heirs of, it says, et faciamus hominem ad imaginem et similitudinem. And someone said, let us shape the human being to the image and similitude of us. It goes on in the next verse. Et creavi Deus hominem ad imaginem suam, ad imaginem Dei creavit elum, masculum et feminam creavit eos. And so it says here, and the Deus now, this is the Latin word, the Deus created the human being in its image and similitude, masculine and feminine, it created them. What's something common that we begin to hear is that we don't often get in English is that to be created in the image of the Creator, whether it's Elohim or whether it's Deus or whether it's Theos, is both male and female. I've said this to my students many times. What we call Adam in Genesis 1:26 is not the name of a man who lives on 126th Street. It is a description of a being who is both male and female and who's created in the image of the powers, the Elohim, equally. That's the original intent, that both male and female would be created, shaped, and formed as one being with two parts, so to speak, in the image of the Elohim. Because the Elohim themselves in Genesis have been created as male and female powers. All that came into existence. And over time, through translations and distortions, this gets narrowed down to a focus on a man, and not only a man, but a Germanic white man in the image of a Germanic white deity. You hear the correspondence? You see where I'm going with this? You see why translations matter? You can't get to where we are now unless you have changed the original intent. Therefore, this means that the one who's most in the image of the deity will have the most privilege. Are you listening? Yes. Does this make sense? Yes. So if the one presumed to be in the image of the creative power is white male, he or she, in this case, he is more privileged because what? He's in the image of a white deity, of God, who's a man, not male and female any longer, but totally privileged because he represents, or according to this misinterpretation, what it means to truly, and I emphasize that, to be truly in the image of the creative powers. And this is what must be rectified. So, this brings us to what I call the perversion. The perversion of the model that all human beings are to be in the image of the living one, to one where a particular human being is seen and understood and actualizes himself as uniquely in the image of the creative being. Now, in addition to the biblical and theological perversion, there's a sociological, historical perversion. And it sounds something like this. You've heard it already from Mr. Wise, and he did it so eloquently, and also in the conversation with Dr. Phil. It goes something like this. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It's embedded somewhere. Where is it embedded? The genealogy and dogma, i.e. opinion, of white supremacy are deeply embedded within the European economic history of class, gender, and race. The latter has functioned, that is race, and everybody hear this, as an extended evolution of European feudalism in its own context, as Mr. Wise was saying, white people beating up on each other in Europe, to a neo-feudalism within the United States by the subjugation and annihilation, first and foremost, of indigenous peoples. To pretend as though, and my students, I talked about this last Thursday, my country is his of thee, sweet land of liberty, I sing, etc., as though nobody else existed here before. The wiping out of many, many nations that existed before, and to write a new narrative now as though they not existed at all. So that's the first part of it, the annihilation of indigenous people, clearing the land, so to speak, and then along with that, or in sequence to it, is the servitude, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly of whom? Of Africans, to exploit agrarian profits working the land. This dogma opinion does not exclude, and I'm glad that the last part of Dr. Phil's presentation touched on that, and did you see how hot it got when it began to touch on that topic? How much more visceral it became when we got to that topic? I'm glad it showed that, because this is another piece of not just the white male privilege, but the white female complicity. Listen, this dogma does not exclude the white female complicity and collaboration. For example, Southern U.S. neo-feudalism conceded inheritance rights to whom? To the wife of the plantation owner, like the Romans before, and her children, and not to whom? Not to the female servants and or their children. In fact, the latter could be sold for profit. Consequently, within this economic compromise, she, in this instance, in this hegemonic arrangement, is neither helpless nor disenfranchised. On the contrary, she benefited. Even when she pretended she didn't. Are you listening? Yeah. Even when she says it doesn't exist. Complicity of silence. But nonetheless, what? Complicity. This one example brings the economics of race and gender into an intersection and focus more clearly. Also, subsequent racialism and racial violence are connected to this covert consent, all the way up to being on the phone about someone selling water or barbecuing. Are you listening to me? The white male, at the same time, became the predominant architect, preserver, and undisputed enforcer of the doctrine and replicated teachings of racial domination along with its economic corollaries. Now let's look at this word economics. Where does it come from, economics? The word economics comes from two Greek words, orikos and nomos, law of the house, how the house is managed. And what is the house? The house is the house of humanity. And which force or which empire made this most viscerally understood? It was the Roman Empire. Orikos nomos. Even though it's a Greek word, it really gets deeply seated in the Roman Empire. The house management. This is the management of the house of services, goods, products, and yes, human labor. Within the U.S., Southern neo-feudalism, as I've said before, this functioned in correlation to the Roman idea of the pater familias. Have you ever heard the word pater familias? It means father of the house. We said man of the house. This goes back to the Roman idea, like Caesar, that the man who was freeborn, who had property, was autonomous, or relatively so. Had control over wife, children, slaves. And we mean control as in life or death. Caesar was the ultimate pater familias. Every free Roman male with property was also a pater familias. And on the southern case, it was the plantation master. Have you ever wondered why they always insisted upon being called master? It's from the Latin word magister, which means manager. They were managing the economic resources on that plantation. That's why we call them massa, but it's from the word master. Magister, the manager. Why? Because this person was the final arbiter of how his domain would be ruled. His wife, his children, and servants were all subject to him. No woman was free without his permission or adjudication. No woman was ultimately free. Ironically, this is the very abomination, and I'm just speaking forward now, that Yeshua and his followers, and especially Paul, rebelled against at the cost of their lives. Within the context of the expedient efficiency of Christian agrarian capitalism. That's Southern Christian agrarian capitalism. It had another form in the North. It was more industrial capitalism. But here, it was agrarian capitalism. The abominations and examples of the founders of Christianity were stringently distorted into pro-slavery apologetics and suppressed by abominable apostasies. What I mean by apostasy, it's the word that means you turn away from something. You know what it is. You know what truth is. But you intentionally do what? You intentionally turn away from it. I just went to a college where we celebrated, predominantly white college in Memphis, Tennessee, the 50th founding of the Black Student Association. And there was a building that was dedicated in 1925 to one Benjamin Palmer. It was called Palmer Hall. Just that weekend that we had our 50th celebration, they decided to change the name from Palmer Hall to Southwestern Hall. Finally, after almost 100 years, acknowledging that the founding father of that college was a white supremacist who advocated the curse of Ham, that African Americans were enslaved because they were cursed based on a passage in Genesis. That's another context. But I want you to see how deeply seated this thing is and how it can be so pervasive all around you, you're not realizing that it is everywhere. And only now they changed that. One such apostasy, and so now I want to get to another piece of it. This form of apostasy is not just generically white. As you heard Mr. Wise define it, that's a term that emerged in the modern era in relationship to enslavement of Africans. But it's deeper than that even. It's WASP. Everybody know what WASP means? White, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. It is uniquely Germanic. This important variable in the formula of white male domination stemmed from the double-pronged heresy of the supremacy of both Germanic ethnicity and gender. In rebellion against the injunction of Genesis 1:26 and 27, the white Germanic male assumed the one and only archetypal mode of true existence and true humanity. This is what I was referring to earlier. If you create a translation that constructs Genesis 1:26 another way, where it no longer talks about the parity of men and women, but talks more about, just at this stage, the bumping up of Adam as a noun, a masculine noun, a man, and a European white man, you follow me? Then your notion of God's blessing and privilege and entitlement is going to correspond to whom? That man. And therefore that man is entitled because, why? He has been given by the white God, the white male God. Everybody follow me? The privilege to not just be a steward, but to dominate, to control, and to direct. Now, this apostasy is also borrowed from an Aristotelian idea. What do I mean by that? Hierarchy of beings. Deity, male, female. Y'all see what I'm doing? Servants, children, or children and servants can be interchangeable. White is good, listen, because its color, it becomes ontological. White is what? White is good. Black is what? Black is bad. Male is good. What's bad? Female is bad. Rich is good. What's bad? Poor is bad. Ownership is good. Being owned is what? Bad, but it's your destiny. Are you listening? Because there's the hierarchy coming down and not up. So this infuses this notion of white male dominance. It infuses it, it invigorizes it. In the doctrine of the priestly narrative, which Genesis 1 is taken from, the divinely inspired communitarian and egalitarian notion. Men and women as equal, and that's the idea, is that men and women are created as equal, and they're in the image of the creative powers as male and female equally, as the Elohim themselves are male and female. This is distorted to now the idea, no. There's just one king, i.e. God in heaven, and one ruler, i.e. the white male, where? On earth. And the masters would say this, God rules in heaven. They said on the plantation, that's what God rules in heaven. But I rule on this plantation. This is where they were coming from. The distortion, again, and the blending of the heresy of a hierarchy into this text. And it is a false deity. It seems to be ubiquitous. It seems to be omnipresent, but it is still what? A false deity. And this is what brings forth righteous resistance. The heresy means thinking differently from where the text has stated this equality. The apostasy means turning away from what the text has said. And then the abomination is the downright oppression of others. Heresy, apostasy, abomination of white supremacy, like the oppressive economics. And what did I say the word economics means? Management of the house. The house should be managed by all. But the house becomes managed by whom? One, who dominates and oppresses. It has to be countered with righteous resistance. The biblical passages that were presented and exegeted within this article model this for us. Again, the priestly writer, and this is important, the priestly writer who wrote Genesis chapter 1 is writing during a time when the Hebrews are virtual slaves in Babylon. And is writing and trying to imagine, in this type of condition, is this the way it's supposed to be? No. Well, how do we imagine something different? Bereshit bara Elohim et ha-shemayim ve'et ha'aretz. Not in the beginning there was Rome, not in the beginning there was Babylon, but in the beginning the strong ones created the heavens and the earth. And those same strong ones created and intended for us all to be equal. But equality does not happen simply because you want it. You got to fight for it. Are you listening? You got to go and get it. You got to reclaim it at all levels of spirit, soul, and body. It has to be retrieved. It has to be reparated, as it were. Are you listening? This author in Genesis crafted a radical, alternative, macroeconomic vision of both creation and economic justice. Resistance to alleged supremacy is costly. It always is. But non-resistance is more costly. Are you listening? Yes. Oppressive powers don't stop because you let them keep going. They keep going. Until they're what? Until they're stopped. It has to be exposed, denounced, and confronted whenever and wherever it rears its head. White supremacy is a form of a demonic power of class, race, and gender. And it is tenacious, make no doubt about it. Nevertheless, it is not omnipotent. It is not all-powerful. It may present itself as omnipotent, but this is an illusion. It masquerades as omniscient or knowing all things, but this is false knowledge. Within the context of the U.S., African American cultural history and resistance is, and will continue to demonstrate that this demonic force is a false deity. How? Through continued effort in resisting it in thoughts, words, and deeds. It has to be called out and exercised as the demonic spirit that it is. It has to be done with force. Ferociously resisted. Those who stand on the path of, and I want to make a twist here, affirmative action for white supremacy. You all hear how I'm saying this now. Affirmative action for white supremacy and domination must intentionally reject it. And people say, well, how do we become allies? Reject it. Resist it. Where you are. Don't concede to it. Turn around from it. Even more demanding, these cannot be substituted with insidious forms of paternalism or maternalism towards the intended victims of white supremacy. They must be unmasked too. Exorcism and resistance are both the challenge and the call to live in bona fide biblical discipleship and with true confessional authority. I believe we're all created to be equal, and I strive to make that manifest. Then, thirdly, and I'll stop here, white supremacy must be defeated and banished into the wilderness via multiple revolutionary strategies. And I'm not talking about physical revolutionary strategies as such, although they may be necessary sometimes. I'm talking about what? Revolutionary in the mind. Revolution in thought, word, and deed. Revolution in not conceding to it. Revolution in not participating with it. Revolution in going forward knowing that you are in the image of the divine and you conduct yourself as such, regardless of what is presented in front of you. Not ignoring it, but just moving on past it. My granddaughter, I'm going to stop right here. My granddaughter said, Daddy, Granddaddy, I'm starting a new movement. I said, baby, what's your new movement? She said, I call it unbothered. I said, what does that mean? She said, I'm unbothered by what other people are trying to do to keep me down and back. I'm unbothered by that. I know it's there. I'm not in denial about it, but I'm unbothered about how it's going to impact me. I'm going to be about the business of what I'm supposed to be doing in this life, in this world, in an unbothered manner. I said, sign me up. I want to be unbothered too. I'll stop right there. I won't read the rest of this. I'll stop right there. Thank you so much.